Hey everyone, this is Randy Kim from the Banh Mi Chronicles podcast. So today I decided that we are going to do an emergency episode, and I'm bringing in a familiar guest who I actually shared last week's episode on. And I have a very good feeling that this is not going to be the last time you're going to be on my show. I think the way things are going, and I think there's a reason why. I feel like I feel like the things that I have known about you, the work that you do is going to be very critical, especially since now that I'm back and I have a lot of concerns about what is happening in our communities. So with that said, I do want to issue a trigger warning that the episode we will talk about will be very challenging and upsetting at times because it will involve what is happening with ICE, both locally in Chicago, where we reside, and nationally, what has been happening. Um, there will be mentions of violence against civilians, protesters, and we also hope that by listening that this will help to inform you rather than alarming you and thinking about ways in which we can or you can support the work that is protecting communities and also being able to have important conversations with people in your life about what is happening. So, with that said, Jung has been a person who has been community organizing, done mutual aid work, and has supported, the safety of protesters. So, Jung, thank you so much for being on at the last minute again. I mean, who knew that I would have you twice in like the past couple of days? But here we
Yeah,
are,
thank
but we're doing the most
you.
important work. You're doing the
Thank you
most
for
important work.
having me back. From the people who brought you the bonus episode, we are now back with the emergency episode.
And
Maybe someday in the future, we will have a fully planned episode.
yeah, and hopefully it'll be a more fun one this time
Yeah,
too.
yeah, definitely. But like you said, I'm grateful that we can have this conversation in the midst of all that's happening. And I am, yeah, I want to make sure that folks know that we aren't being alarmist. Like, and in my experience of helping people to stay safe when they're on the streets, as well as my experience as a doula and and a care worker, I know that often it's great to have more information rather than less information. That like the anxiety and fear of uncertainty comes when we don't know what's going to happen, and so I share this information. Randy has asked me to share this information um, in the spirit of um, knowledge and in the spirit of building our own power and autonomy and self-determination and skills. The more that we know together, the safer we can be and the better that we can take care of each other. And that just makes us more powerful across the board,
Mhm.
whatever we're doing.
Thank
So
you so
thank you,
much.
Randy.
Yeah, thank you so much
Yeah.
for sharing this and for starting it off like with this framework that we are going to have on this ongoing, very traumatizing situation here. Last week, we have seen protesters like across the US, specifically in places like Portland, Chicago, and like in Broadview, which is like outside of Chicago. And in this case, there were protesters that were, like in front of the ICE detention center. And during that peaceful protest, I mean, there is video footage of what was happening. ICE, decided to take matters into their own hand, go rogue, and physically assault the protesters who were there peacefully. And also, there were ICE agents on the rooftops, using rubber guns. I'm not so good with the names here, but they were using any kind of weapons to um harm protesters. And this is a situation that has only escalated. And then last night, yesterday on, Thursday night, Friday morning, ICE came into a predominantly Black community in the South Side, South Shore of Chicago community and decided to go without any warrants, barge into apartment buildings where Black families were living in, and we're also talking US citizens on top of it. So it's like this kind of shows where the direction that the federal government is taking this, and also what is currently happening in this landscape as things start to really build up. So I think this is really important to like show what is happening. Um, what can you share about the history of ICE in Chicago? What do you know about its presence, you know?
Yeah, so I I don't necessarily have like a full timeline of ICE in Chicago, but I can share a few things about ICE's presence in Broadview, as well as kind of what's been happening over the last month or so. So I always like to remind folks that ICE is relatively young as a government agency. The Department of Homeland Security that it's under was created in the wake of 9/11 and the extreme like Islamophobia and racism and xenophobia that happened both culturally but also legislatively after that event. And so ICE has only really existed since 2003. So like you know, like you it wasn't even around like when you and I we're like aging ourselves a little bit here, but like when you and I were in high school, like
Hmm.
ICE did not exist.
Hmm.
So like even though in compared to like Gen Alpha and Gen Z, like we are like the melders, like it is still like
Melders, never heard of
right.
that.
It's still like relatively young. Melders, elder, middle elders.
Yeah.
Um, but ICE is still relatively young. And so because of that, like the facility in Broadview, it opened as what's called like a staging facility in 2006. So it's also relatively new. Like it's not brand new. It has been there for a couple of decades, but it hasn't been there forever. Right. And like Chicago, I know is like a transplant here, someone who wasn't born here or like didn't grow up here. I know that like there are places in Chicago that have deep history. Like that the like dive bar on the corner is like probably been around for like 45 years, right? So like the fact that this staging facility in Broadview, so-called staging facility, hasn't even been around 20 years means that like it has a presence there, but it hasn't been there forever, which means that like it could eventually not be there again someday. And let's imagine that future. But that being said, it's the facility there at Broadview, it's been publicized as a site where people are supposed to be held temporarily before they're transferred elsewhere in the country. It's been reported throughout the years, as well as like some very recent lawsuits for really terrible and violent and inhumane conditions, such as like there's a lack of food, a lack of beds, a lack of clean conditions, like no medical care, all of that. Um, and protests have been happening there for years, as well as like in this kind of current iteration of protests have been happening there over the past few months. And there's currently an active campaign to shut it down that has like waxed and waned over the years. And I've included a link about that campaign in the episode notes so that listeners and folks who are watching this video will be able to connect to that campaign. Um, but around late August, early September, the federal government announced that that Broadview facility was going to be the primary processing center for the the Chicago area ICE operations for like the 2 months that followed. So like this period that we're in. Previous to that, like they had been doing a lot of the processing and holding at other facilities throughout the city. Um, and I think because of the action from autonomous community members and organized community groups that was
Mhm.
happening to try and interrupt operations at those facilities. They decided to have it happen elsewhere. Um, and so, most recently, activists and community leaders have been organizing actions on Fridays and Saturdays. Um, and so, some of that has been some of the most recent um, publicity where like lots of pictures, news stories,
Mhm.
exposure of where ICE and Customs and Border Patrol, CBP agents have been using um, physical force. They've been using a number of chemical weapons, including
Mhm.
tear gas, pepper spray, and pepper balls, which are
Mhm.
both like a solid projectile, but also like a gas that happens upon explosion, as well as rubber bullets. And they've been using those against the protesters that are there, against impacted families, folks who are like coming to these facilities trying to like find their family members, on journalists who are like clearly labeled as press, on street medics, on legal workers, as well as on. I have heard that they have used them on first responders in the town um, of Broadview as well. That like these ICE agents and CBP agents have been tear gassing and pepper spraying uh, the police of the police of Broadview, and that's what Broadview has like most recently become most upset about. That like their police have been tear gassed, um,
Mhm.
and one of the so right now, like very recently, ICE put up a fence around that facility around their facility in Broadview, and this was against the wishes, I believe, of the elected officials in Broadview, and so yeah, when you go there, there's just like a ton of fencing. There are often uh, ICE agents and CBP agents who are on the roof of the facility. And these agents are, patrolling with weapons in hand. So whether they're on the ground and on the roof, they're wearing non-medical face coverings, which I like as a person who is immunocompromised. And so it like a little bit elevated risk for COVID exposure as well as like other communicable diseases. Like I'm regularly wearing like a KN95 type mask, like in public, like all public spaces. But the face coverings that these agents are wearing are of the non-medical kind. They also are frequently wearing gas masks, helmets, and like a lot of other militarized gear. Um, in addition to like their fatigue uniforms, which can
Mhm.
be, if folks are encountering that, like it can be really jarring. It can be really hard to tell, like, are these ICE agents? Are these CBP agents? Like, is this National Guard? Is this someone who may have just like bought a whole bunch of gear off of the internet? Like, we're not sure. And so, regardless of like who it is in this uniform, like it can be a terrifying situation
Mm.
to come across.
I think when I was looking at your notes, and you
Mm-hmm.
mentioned like in late August, early September, the federal government announced that the Broadview facility will be the primary processing center for Chicago area ICE operations for the next
Mm-hmm.
1 to 2 months.
Yeah.
Now, with that said, do you have an inkling as to what their next move is after those 2 months? And are we looking at potentially new ICE centers being created throughout the city? That's a question I'm thinking about
I
now.
have, yeah, that's a really big question, and I don't know. One of the things that I have learned, just in my like community work in general, is that governments are very unpredictable. Even if they are, being led by folks that like we have elected and still support. And so when a government is being led by people who are unpredictable and are not necessarily values aligned with us, like that makes it even harder to tell what they are going to do. Um, and because I am not necessarily as in part of the like nonprofit
Mhm.
infrastructure for like immigrant justice work. There are likely people who like know know things about that I do not. Yeah,
Mhm. I
yeah.
also,
My scope is a lot more focused on like
Mhm.
keeping people safe when
Yeah.
they are like on the ground. Yeah.
And with that said, like I'm very curious, like for folks that are not aware of the differences between ICE
Mm-hmm.
agents, military, National Guard, police, and people cosplaying as either of those. I'm
Mm-hmm.
very curious what have you or other folks that you know have observed these differences and what they can and cannot do.
So one thing that I will say about any sort of police force, whether they are a local police force like the Chicago police or the Broadview police, a state police force like the Illinois State Police, or a federal police force. Yeah, a federal police force like the FBI, Border Control, or ICE agents, or military forces like active duty army that's typically deployed like outside the US, or National Guard, which would be deployed inside the US, is that um, there might be regardless of what individual people's motives are, or personalities are, or intentions are, these are typically groups of people that are not supporting community safety. So I will just say that first off. Um, the ICE and ICE and Customs and Border Patrol, as well as the FBI, those are federal agents, which means that if they were to pick you up off the street, that you would go through a different type of like judicial system and like jail and prison system. You would be at like the federal. Whereas if you were picked up, say, by like Chicago police, you would go through like a local system. And so that, legally there are differences in like who can then like find and support you. Um, like if you are connected to the city system, then an office like this, the like city public defender's office, is more likely to be able to find you and support you rather than if you're going through the federal system, unfortunately. Um, because they might not have access to that information. Another thing that I want to mention, even though you know practices like unlawful search and seizure are part of what the police do on a regular basis, especially to racialized communities, particularly Black communities. I will say that one of the things that is specific to U.S. immigration police is that U.S. immigration law allows Customs and Border Patrol to do warrantless searches. Uh, um, and this can be of buses, of planes, of boats, of your person, everywhere within the 100 miles of a land or water border. So when people hear like within 100 miles of a border, they think like, oh, within 100 miles of like the border with Mexico in the south, and then the border with Canada in the north. But it's also the water borders. So because in Chicago, like we live on one of the Great Lakes, that is also considered a water border. So if you just like, you can go on the internet and find these maps pretty easily. I think I've also linked to one in the episode notes. Um, but if you just look for like CBP 100-mile zone, you will find a map that outlines that. And the ACLU, groups like the ACLU have filed lawsuits against this, saying that it is harmful to the population, of course, because it's like allowing warrantless searches and seizures, and like in their education and lawsuits, they have shared that like 2/3 of the U.S. population lives within these areas because it is coastal areas. It is like a lot of large urban areas in the Great Lakes, depending on how small your state is, like it could be your entire state. So like because Florida is like completely surrounded by water, like it includes all of Florida. It includes like all of a place like New Jersey. It includes all of a
California.
place. Well, it includes a
Or,
huge chunk of California, the coast in California. It includes like, you know, all of like a place like Rhode Island, that sort
Mhm.
of thing. So I think that those are really important things to know about these federal agents. Um, I think one of the things that I have seen on the internet that I'm not sure is helpful is, you know, I do know that there is a lot of fear that like people are or are going to start um like buying fake gear on the internet and kind of like showing up to like kidnap people without necessary authority. But I do know that there has been a strain of people saying that like these can't be real from the beginning, have been saying that like these folks can't be real ICE agents because of how harmful they are. And I actually want to underscore that like no, this is like what ICE has been all along,
Mhm.
regardless of whether they have been operating under a Trump presidency or, for instance, under an Obama presidency. Like, this is what ICE was designed to do. I would say, like, the system of ICE as it was created is not necessarily broken, it is operating as it was intended to operate.
Mhm.
And because it is operating as it was intended to operate, which is in a very harmful way, that the best way that we can address it is to actually question whether a system like it
Mhm.
should exist at all.
Mhm. Thank you so much. And what I also am wondering is with protesters getting harmed, physically harmed,
Mm-hmm.
I also wonder, like, if they're getting arrested, what has that looked like so far from like being able to get released and the legal services that are provided to them? I'm also curious about that. And also with civilians that are getting forcibly kidnapped and disappeared. Also, I know they're two separate topics, but they're also
Mm-hmm.
like it's the legal resources. What is the opportunity to try to get them out of prison?
Yeah, those are really good questions. I don't have full answers to
Mhm.
them because I don't do a ton of work on the legal side, but I have included a couple of resources in the episode notes. One is a link from a webpage for the National Lawyers Guild about like knowing your rights at protests and like how to
Mhm.
connect with them. And then another kind of know your rights-ish type um, resource is with the Illinois Coalition for Immigrant and Refugee Rights for its Family Support Network. So this both provides information for folks to know their rights in a number of different circumstances, as well as to can connect people who need legal resources. Um, I do know that there have been folks who have been arrested at protests. Um, like in many situations, like ICE the ICE agents will like surround somebody
Mhm.
or will like go up to somebody and then they have like taken those people like back into the ICE facility. It is like very scary to watch because
Mhm.
it feels and looks very targeted and very direct, which
Mhm.
is really horrifying. Um, it's even though it is something that has happened before and something that people may have seen before, even if it is not new, I hope that for many of us it continues to be shocking to the extent that it continues to horrify us. Um, what I will say is that some of the people who have been arrested have been released with citations, and some of the people have been brought up on federal charges. There's not necessarily much more I can say
Mhm.
about that. Um, but what I will say is that arresting number one, arresting people for protesting is unacceptable. Number two, targeting journalists and the press is unacceptable. And number three, that separating people from families and like shipping them off to various facilities is like not the way to like have safety
Hmm.
in our communities. Um, and I just want to like share a lot of appreciation and gratitude for both movement lawyers who are doing a lot of work to support protesters, as well as immigration lawyers who are doing a lot of work to support people who are experiencing detention or deportation and family reunification.
Hmm.
Um, because that both of those types of legal work are strenuous
Hmm.
and hard and often very overlooked. And I know that our communities are better off with those legal resources there.
Hmm. I also wonder about, I think this is kind of where I'm really trying to process all this information here. Um, I wonder about the the situations where people are protesting for the first time or actually fairly inexperienced. I should say, like, if it's not at a nice protest, it could be like a No Kings protest, or or anything, that's related to the Trump administration. Um, what does the landscape look like for protesters? What should protesters or people, civilians who are entering into those spaces, whether they're there to protest or just happen to be walking by, I'm curious as to what really people should be prepared for, what they're seeing, and what safety looks like during this time.
I mean, that's a really huge question. Like, safe, I feel like you could have like an entire episode series on what
Hmm.
safety looks like
Absolutely.
during these times, because it's so many things that like really I think connect back to like the root causes of like why injustice exists. So I won't go into like
Hmm.
all of that. I'll like stay thinking about protest especially.
Hmm.
Um, but would it be helpful to me to kind of like walk through like protest preparation or that sort of
Absolutely.
yeah,
I think
that sort of process?
yeah, protest preparation is something that I feel is very important for anyone that is going in there without the full knowledge or context of what is currently happening, because the goalpost keeps moving in terms of protests
Mm-hmm.
and the way that the police state is responding in ways. So I also think it's important to kind of like acknowledge that it's some shifting goalposts and it's not always the same, but it carries a lot of that same risk.
Yeah. So before I move into like talking about protest logistics, there's some things that I have been thinking about related to like left strategy or like how, what is it going to take for us to win? And like those are really big questions that I don't have the answer to. And I don't know that like I am the always the best person to talk about strategy, but what I
Mhm.
do know is and what I have seen over the past 3 years is that like what we're doing is not fully effective. So like it might be working, but it's not like working enough. And also that like there is huge opposition to protest from like a lot of political actors and a lot of folks who have
Hey
it's my
Mochi.
cat
Hey
from folks
Mochi.
who have like a lot of political orientations. We're just gonna wait for Mochi to like jump into the little like rolly cart that I have sitting next to my work area. This that's my cat Mochi. Um, and so I think that protest and like being at these like really large protests, there is a there's a function, like there's a purpose for those protests, like usually often to like raise awareness, to bring more people in, to like get media attention,
Mhm.
and also that like protest cannot cannot be the only thing that we
Mhm.
are doing, or at least like these large protests cannot be the only thing that we're doing, and also likely like smaller actions also, like these sorts of tactics are it's not a complete strategy, and like
Mhm.
folks that I work with that do strategy and like operations and campaign work know that, right, that like this has to be part of an ongoing um an ongoing strategy that also includes like political education and care work and figuring out like uh the role of government in all this, like in uh our relationship to government, I should say, figuring out our
Mhm.
relationship to government and all of this. Um, so I want to say that because I think that because protests get so much media attention, especially these like really large protests, like in downtown Chicago, which are usually like definitely raising issues, but like often far away from like the setting of where a harm is happening. Um, I I want folks to know that like being present there is important, and also to like think about like the everyday ways that you can be continuing to like both build community and like keep community
Mhm.
safe that's like outside of these
Mhm.
protests. So I just wanted to say that. In terms of like in terms of when people are getting ready to protest, or if someone has not been to a
Mhm.
protest before, the first thing that I would usually like advise folks to do in terms of safety planning is really to assess their own capacity and their own risk related to like whatever the activities and the tactics of a specific action are going to be. So this could be related to somebody's like disability needs, could be related to their energy needs, their risk of injury, their risk of surveillance, or their risk of arrest. And of course, like those sorts of things are going to differ for each person and each action, even within actions, right? So in the same way, because I used to be
Mhm.
a sex educator, in the same way that like we think about consent as being something that you are regularly negotiating throughout an encounter, that we're
Mhm.
regularly negotiating in our relationships that are both sexual and non-sexual. We're regularly um, thinking about and navigating and assessing our own consent and risk capacity and risk assessment. It's a regular negotiation that you're going to have with yourself about whether you want to like continue participating. And I like to think about it that way because then if you want to keep participating, you have an opportunity to like re-engage and to like
Mhm.
redecide and to re-choose, and like that's really powerful because
Mhm.
then you're consistently saying like I choose to be here, and I choose to be here because it aligns with my values. I choose to be here because I cannot be silent. I choose to be here because like I can take this risk. um, or you're saying like I choose to be here up until this time, or I choose to be here until I start to see these things happen, or I choose to be here until it looks like people are getting arrested, like those sorts of things. So I always I always advise people to assess their own capacity and risk first. And
Mhm.
then if you decide you're going to go, I would say like do whatever you need to like get grounded and regulated before you go to an action, to really take care of yourself and take
Mhm.
care of your body. So whether that means doing some deep breathing, some stretching, some resting, meditating, praying, if that's something that you do, and then to eat well and to hydrate. People are usually like they don't want to drink water before they go to a protest because they're like, I don't know where the bathroom's going to be. But it's really important to hydrate, and actually, like water will move through you more quickly if you are not hydrating and then like drinking a lot of water at once. And so one of the best ways to hydrate is to actually like take small sips like throughout your time.
Mhm.
And then you won't have like an excess of water. It'll just like move through your like a
Mhm.
regular pace, and you won't necessarily have you may not have to like stop and find a bathroom like every hour or
Mhm.
so, but definitely stay hydrated. Um, I usually will, especially if you know there's going to be chemical injury exposure risk, to like dress for that. But also always advise people to dress to blend in to a certain extent. So
Mhm.
whether that means like you're part of a group that's going to use what's called black bloc, which means you're wearing all black so that like it's really hard to tell you apart. That means like black pants, black long sleeve shirts, black boots, black hats or hoodies, like black face coverings, or what's called gray block, which is like would be more common, and is what I think of is just like kind of it's quote unquote like anonymous or generic or unlabeled clothing. So you're wearing you're wearing pants that are like a dark color that don't really stand out. You're wearing like a long sleeve shirt or a rain jacket that doesn't necessarily it like you wouldn't be able to necessarily like tell it apart from a lot of people in a crowd. You might be wearing like a baseball cap that's not like a super rare baseball cap, and you're wearing comfortable shoes.
Mhm.
Um, I always advise people to wear long sleeves and long pants and closed toed shoes.
Mhm.
Um, I am often not someone who is um, thinking who's thinking about getting sweaty at a protest. Like I know that that's probably going to happen. And so I am always just like, well, I'm going to have to shower whenever. If it's a type of protest that is, or the type of action that is like so low key that like it's you have lots of permits, it's been like fully sanctioned by the police, like the organizers have like talked to the police, and it's more of a parade atmosphere, and so therefore like people might be wearing costumes or like dressing in certain ways or whatever, then like that would be okay. But I usually will advise people to
Mhm.
like wear gray block, or if their group has decided to wear black block. um, if you're going into like a higher risk situation, such as like what things have looked like outside of Broadview, I also advise people to refrain from wearing things that will increase their injury from chemical weapons exposure. So not wearing contacts, but also like not wearing lotion or makeup or face paint or sunscreen. Um, Things like tear gas and pepper spray, especially, like they really like to stick to things and they stick to
Mhm.
oil.
Mhm.
And so if you're wearing contacts, they're going to get like between the contact and your eyeball, which is
Mhm.
really incredibly painful and will make it impossible for you to see.
Mhm.
So if you are a person that wears contacts, I would say like wear your glasses that day. But also like if you're wearing like a ton of skincare, if you're wearing a ton of makeup, if you're wearing a ton of lotion, like that can also increase the likelihood that it's going to stick to your skin, especially if you have exposed limbs instead of like long sleeves, long pants. And then something, something that uh, I will advise folks to do as well is to like write the numbers for your local like National Lawyers Guild hotline or like Public Defenders hotline, as well as an emergency contact on your body and permanent marker in case like your phone dies, you get separated from your phone, or from it's taken. Um, because if you are kidnapped or arrested by agents or police, then that way you will have those numbers on you.
Mhm.
Um, if folks are so those are the things to like prep before you go. Um, if folks are like when you're going, I always advise people to go with other people, and then as soon as you get there to like make your exit plan. So like know how you are going to leave. Um, both the pathway that you're going to use to leave. So, like, what are the streets or the sidewalks? What's the alley I'm going to take? And, here in
Mhm.
Chicago, we have lots of alleys. That's
Mhm.
not the case everywhere. But, like, know how you're going to get out of there and what a rendezvous point might be that's like a little bit off site, that's like a
Mhm.
little bit far away that you're like, this is where we're going to meet up. And maybe that's your car, right? Maybe that's where you might have parked if you drove, but make sure you're like making those plans in case you get separated from folks. Um, and then also to like I would say pack efficiently, but like still pack lightly so that if you like had to move quickly, you could. So, um, yeah, that could mean like bringing a few snacks, whether that is like granola bars or like meat sticks, like Slim Jims or whatever. I call it durable fruit. It's like fruit that could take a little bit of a beating. Like, you don't want to bring like your most, you don't want to bring like ripe peaches, right? Like they can't really, they're gonna like take a beating on the way home. They might not make it home
They
from
might
the
not
grocery
even make
store,
it. They might
right?
even get out of the grocery store,
Um,
to be honest. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. So like they're not like ripe peaches are like not good protest snacks. But something like the clementine oranges, like you could
Mhm.
drop that on the ground. It could get smushed in a bag. You could still peel it and eat it, and it's like really hydrating and can be cooling
What
and
about dry
soothing as
fruit?
well.
What about
Yeah,
dry
yeah,
fruit? Yeah. Yeah.
dry
Mhm.
fruit as well. Yeah,
Mhm.
that is dry fruit is obviously like a very durable fruit as well,
Yeah.
especially if it's in a bag.
Mhm.
Um, and then I would say at least two bottles of water. And I advise folks to buy the sport top bottles because then you'll have one for drinking and then one for treating if you're exposed to chemical weapons. In addition to that, like if folks have a good mask, whether that's disposable mask like a KN95 or like an N100 or a reusable mask like the type of mask you can get at like a hardware store that you would use for like construction or like paint stripping or whatever. Plus taking a few extras in Ziploc baggies so that if you are say you have like a disposable mask on but it's exposed to pepper spray, that way you can take it off and put a clean one on. If you have room for like an extra set of clothes to take those, but regardless, like taking some grocery bags for like sealing up your exposed clothes or
Mhm.
like helping other people seal up their exposed clothes. That might not be a thing that people would like readily think of, but it's something I think of. And then if you're driving there, or even like if you're in someone else's car, to have some blankets or towels for the car for when you're driving home, and then that way that'll cover the seat so you won't get residue from pepper
Mhm.
spray or tear gas on the seats. Um, yeah, and if you have them, taking like goggles, taking a basic first aid kit, those sorts of things. Um, and then when people arrive on site, I always think it's a good idea to practice situational awareness. So, to know exactly where
Mhm.
police or agents or soldiers are, and then to know, like, to be able to see, like, when they're moving, where they're moving to, what they might be holding in their hands. So, whether it is batons, whether it is airsoft guns, which look like paintball guns, but those are the sorts of things that shoot pepper balls, whether it's assault rifles, like the CBP officers were carrying downtown Chicago this past weekend. They were all like carrying assault
Mhm.
rifles, which is terrifying. Um, it was like terrifying for a lot of people to see. And then like what other gear they have on. So um, if if you if you are watching police or federal agents at a protest and you start seeing them putting on gas masks and things like that, like that's when you know, like they're going to start throwing tear gas or pepper spray or pepper balls. As if like they're ready to prevent exposure, then that's when you know, like, okay, I'm going to get ready to prevent exposure. Um, and then Yeah, after I would say like after a protest, it's also really important to engage in a lot of aftercare for yourself. Um, to like get some rest, eat some nourishing food, rehydrate, to ground and to process so that you can release all the any emotions that came up, like whether it is grief or fear or shock or anything else. That like every all the emotions that you're feeling are like important to release. And I think even if you have been to a lot of protests, even if you have seen a lot of things happen, that like it is actually still okay to like have and release those emotions. Like it is still okay to like see something and feel fear. It is still okay to like experience something and feel shock. It doesn't necessarily mean that like you weren't ready or that like you could have done better or that you like could have prevented something. Like our minds, I when we experience a trauma, like we want to immediately move to control because our minds then think like, oh, if I can control all of this, the entire situation next time, then maybe the trauma won't happen. But it's actually okay to be like, I don't, my mind doesn't need to be in control. My mind can like feel what it's feeling and to be able to release that afterwards, um, which is useful and helpful for like our physical and our mental, our emotional and our spiritual support needs.
Mhm.
So I'll pause there. I didn't necessarily go into like the exact procedures for
Mhm.
treating pepper spray and tear gas, which I can get into, but wanted to. I know that was like a long overview of like how to prepare and be at protest, but
Mhm.
um, I think that as as especially like the federal government is continuing to repress protest, and as local governments and institutions continue
Mhm.
to repress protest, right? Like we saw that um, they have been repressing protests like since summer 2020 when folks
Mhm.
were protesting the murder of George Floyd. They were repressing protests when folks started speaking out against the genocide in Palestine, specifically in Gaza. And they're repressing protests now against all manner of like rising authoritarianism. Like it's just going to keep escalating, and the more knowledge we have, the
Mhm.
more that we can care for each other, and the more that
Mhm.
we can be brave and to like take risks even when we
Mhm.
might be uncertain or afraid.
I also want to add something here and to get your thoughts are
Mm-hmm.
in terms of like taking photos during protests and social media.
Mm-hmm.
I think this is something that I think we need to have more of a discussion on of what is appropriate, what affects people's safety, because doxing is a real thing, and it
Yeah.
carries a lot of consequences. So I think how do we as civilians document what is going on without putting people unintentionally in harm's way?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the first thing that I think of is to not be live on a social media platform, like while you're at an action.
Mhm.
Um, and for me, like in terms of safety and security, I advise against it for a number of reasons. One is that then you might not have as much situational awareness of like what is happening around you. So you might not see like when agents are starting to like close people in. You might not see when they're like pulling down the gas mask. You might not see when they're like starting to like block off a street and kettle people, right? And those are important things to be aware of. Number two, if you're live, especially on like a social media platform, rather than just taking a video, which I also advise against for a number of reasons,
Mhm.
then like you are giving real time information like to that platform about where you are and what you're doing, um, in a way that like everybody can see, that you can't edit or you can't edit for later. And so because like you know like you're not the one who owns that data or owns that video, it's like that's increasing risk and harm, could be exposing lots of people. In general, it's for like taking photos or taking video, which I urge people to do with a lot of caution. I would say like don't get people's faces. Try not to get
Mhm.
people at all. Like if you can, like taking pictures of signs, taking pictures of banners,
Mhm.
taking pictures of
Feet, I guess. Like, not, I mean,
yeah,
not,
not like taking pictures of feet in like a wiki feet way, but like taking pictures of like people walking like shoes, right?
yes, abstract
Um,
photos, you know.
yes. I know
I'm not trying to encourage people with those fetishes. We're not going to shame kink anyone here, but I just want to clarify that part.
yeah. Well, also, I mean, if you're going to be taking pictures for a place like footfinder.com, you obviously like, so consent still applies. So you don't want to take pictures of like other people's feet at a protest where they can't consent. Come on. Um, but also, I think that right now there's a big emphasis on like if the police are doing something or if like federal agents are doing something, we have to film it so that we have video, we have proof of what happened. And I think a lot of people have really good intentions when they're doing this, right? Like what they want to capture the truth of what's happening because they know that most likely whatever um, that like policing institution is going to say is like going to be wrong, right? So like that intention, I think, is in the right place. And also, if somebody is is not as skilled or not as experienced in like doing things like cop watch, then they might be capturing information that can also harm or incriminate or expose people to risk that they're not intending to. Um, and I think that it is like it's not a surprise to me that like the only person who was ever indicted and incarcerated related to the murder of Eric Gardner was the person who was filming it, right? And when we think about the murder of George Floyd, like the people who filmed it, like people watch that video and still like there was like right there was like a lot of things that like didn't happen as the result of that video. um and like the young woman who filmed it was experienced a lot of harm and a lot of pushback and a lot of violence. So I think that if people are going to be doing those things to do it with a lot of care and intention, to not necessarily use it as like an influencer moment. Like there are so many ways that people can use their platforms and their voices, um, that aren't necessarily like taking live footage or even not live footage of an action or a protest, um, that that can still like bring people in to an action or mobilize people or catalyze people. Um, so yeah, I would just really advise people to like think carefully and intentionally about um, about the intention of why they're taking video, um, and to think about consent when it comes to like specifically to photographing other people, um, and also like not everything that we do needs to be captured. And actually, if we are like capturing, we might not know that we're like capturing something that could then be used against somebody later. So it's actually better if we just like don't capture it. I think that one of the things that is really challenging in the type of world that we live in, both in the nonprofit landscape that we live in, because folks are like writing about these protests is like part of a request for, say, like donor funds or grant funds that they want lots of pictures of them. They want to say like we can get a lot of people out on the streets, and like funders are actually like demanding those things of people. Like they're asking for numbers, that they want photos to show like this is what our funding can do.
Mm.
And
My development brain and heart is like
I
really
mean,
have my blood
I
pressure's
have,
going up here.
as like a
So
former grant maker, like I have many thoughts about that as well.
yes.
But I think that we that those sorts of that sort of environment like ask people to then like prove, well, yeah, to like prove the protest or to prove the action, and to like then be able to say like we had the biggest one,
Mm,
or we like, yeah, we got the most people there, um and sometimes like having, yeah, are we doing this for the photo? Are we doing it to be effective? Is having the photo part of being effective? Like there are just lots of questions to ask. So yeah, I think that again, I'll return to like encouraging people to do that with a lot of care, with a lot
mhm,
of intention, with a
mhm,
lot of humility. Um, and that if the reason that you're taking a photo is to like prove to other people that you were there and with the purpose of like being seen there and like
mhm.
being,
Validated and
yeah,
yeah.
being seen there and like being like having a platform there, then it might be different than like I'm a journalist who like wants to like use my camera as a way to bear radical witness to what is happening in the world.
Mm, I really appreciate you really taking us through this very insightful conversation, especially on protester civilian safety and also how we document and share what is happening and at whose expense. What does it require? What should we really consider? So thank you for naming all of that. Um, Getting back into the tear gas and, you know, like I've never had gone through it before, but like I know you had, touched up upon like how you take care of your or how you discard your clothing and also what you have to consider, but also what else should you also consider too, and also when to seek for medical attention. I know that sounds very simple, but also at the same time, I feel like there's certain levels that we should be cognizant about.
Yeah, so one of the things that um, police and federal agents will use as crowd control measures are chemical weapons. Like they are becoming a lot more frequently used, um, both because they can cover a wide area and um, they don't require police
Mhm,
and soldiers to like be super close to people. Um, and one of the things I wanted to mention, just in general, related to the militarization, the rise of militarization of like police and federal agent forces, is um, is the connections that like are important to some connections that are important to remember. So, like one of the things that has been part of this like hyper militarization of local police forces as well as federal police forces is um, like it is partnerships with what some folks will call the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces, and what many people like since 2023 have started calling the IOF,
mhm,
the Israeli Offensive Forces. But it's the Israeli military, um, and they partner with police at the local level, the state level, and the federal
mhm,
level in the U.S. through a reciprocal partnership program where they're exchanging training with each other on like quote unquote what's been called worst practices. And so the policing and violence that the Israeli military and police forces are using on Palestinians, as well as Palestinians, as well as a lot of other immigrant communities in occupied Palestine, um, like are things that they're then sharing with local, state, and federal police in the U.S. is like crowd control measures and surveillance measures and like detention and incarceration measures. especially when it comes to suppressing protest. Like that's something that like the Israeli military has done for a really long time and like shared that intelligence and that information like with like policing forces in the US. Um, so I wanted to mention that as like as context for the increase in like the use of chemical weapons. It's like it's like an ongoing loop of like where this information comes from and like why it's being used here is that like Israeli military have used it on Palestinian people. They're sharing that information with police in the US, and then like police in the US are using it here against people in the US. So like
Mhm.
we can unpack all of that. It would
Mhm.
take like a whole other episode, but I
Yes.
did want to mention it here. Is like something that is like documented and facilitated by a range of organizations, right, including like the Anti-Defamation League, the ADL, like local Jewish Federation organizations, and then groups like Birthright. And I included it. I didn't want it to just be a footnote, but I like did include information about what's called the Deadly Exchange Program or Deadly Exchange Campaign that is like spearheaded by Jewish Voice for Peace. But so when we think about, or I included that in the episode notes, but so when we think about chemical weapons, like they are being used more and more here in Chicago at protests, particularly by federal agents. And like I said, they're using them because they can cover a wide area. They're like really noxious and like
Mhm.
immediately destabilizing to people. And you don't have to be like super close to somebody. So like if you're gonna use a baton on somebody, like you have to be pretty close physical proximity to them. With like tear gas, you don't necessarily. And so it is both a way that like ICE agents can like insulate themselves from like being in close physical proximity to a protester, but also like cover a wide area with what they're doing. Um, but in general, like tear gas and pepper spray, like they are things that they stick to things, right? And they settle to the ground. So it's good to like stay upwind of where tear gas and pepper spray are so that they're not like blowing right in your face,
Mhm.
if possible. I also will generally advise people to like not lay on the ground, like for safety. Like obviously, if you are incapacitated and need to be on the ground, that's
Mhm.
different than like, oh, I'm gonna like lay on this grass that like might have pepper spray residue all over it.
Mhm.
Or would like advise people to like not lean against fencing or barriers. So in particular, like at a protest site like outside this Bridgeview ICE facility, there's a ton of fencing there. There's a ton of barriers there. There's also like a lot of wide open asphalt that people have been like sitting on, laying on, like chalking. But it also because the like the tear gas and the pepper spray settles there, like they're just getting more of it on their body.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, but if you so this is another reason why you're going to want to go like no contacts. You're
Mhm.
going to want to like have a really good mask on, whether that is like one of these like reusable masks that you would get like at the hardware store or like a disposable like KN95, like the type of mask that you might have used that hopefully you are still using because the pandemic is still going, but that you might have been if you're not currently masking that you probably would have used in like 2021.
Mhm.
Um, but the first thing, like I said, the first thing that a chemical weapon is likely going to do is it's going to destabilize you. Like it's going to be really, really painful, and you're not going to be sure what's going on.
Mhm.
Um, and so, if I saw somebody who was experiencing chemical weapons exposure, I would probably like go up to them. I would like say, I would say close to them, like, "Hey, I am like I'd share my name and like say I am here to help you. Because if you can't see anything and someone grabs you, like that can be really shocking. That can be
Mhm.
really disorienting. But I would say like, hey, like my name is Jung. I'd like to help you. Um, and then the best way to treat a tear gas or pepper spray exposure is to flush people's eyes. So you're gonna want to like flush people's eyes and skin with a direct and steady stream of water. And I
Mhm.
say water because I mean water.
Mm,
There's so much information on the internet where people are like, no, do this mix or this mix or this thing. Water is really effective
mhm,
because it's about having like the right kind of pH to counteract it, but also just like
mm,
having a liquid that's gonna like literally move something out of your eyes with like
mm,
the force of its spray. Um, so, things that are on the internet, like mixes with Maalox, mixes with baby shampoo, they're not necessarily any more effective than water on its own. And then something like milk, which I think because of a show like Hot Ones, everyone is like milk and ice cream like counteract the impacts of like really high capsaicin content. But if you're, think about what happens if you have milk out in the sun and not refrigeration for a
mm.
really long time, right? Like what happens to it?
Get spoiled.
Right. And so you don't like you don't want to put spoiled milk like in your eye. Um, so that's why
Mm,
water or saline, but it's a lot cheaper and easier to like buy water and have water on hand is the best. And I
mm,
that's why I advise folks um, to take Sport Top bottled water or Sport Top water bottles, one that you'll have for drinking and one that you'll have for treating, so that they're always
mm,
on you in case this sort of exposure happens. So the best way that you would do it would be like to tip your someone's face back, and then like starting from like the inner corner, you would spray moving to the out corner. I can't tell if you can see this in
yes.
the video, um, but you want to like help gravity do its work. So that's why you're starting from the inner corner and then going out with like a water bottle and like a really direct spray onto the eye outwards. And if you're like this, then that means it's going to run off in these two directions.
Mm,
Um, and and that can be like the best way to like help someone at least just like get it out of their eyes enough so that you can then like move them to a different location, so that you can like do a lot more kind of triage asking triage to see if they have any other injuries, asking people what kinds of other support they need,
mhm,
connecting them to like their own protest buddy, helping them like get some water, get a snack, get
mhm,
off site.
mhm.
Um,
What
the
about,
next,
oh, sorry.
mm-hmm,
What about rubber bullets? Especially, I'm curious to know,
mm-hmm.
obviously, it's supposed to hurt, but I'm
Yeah,
curious about
yeah, they're really painful.
yeah, I'm curious about what that treatment looks like immediately, especially, I mean, every person's body is very
Mm-hmm.
different and how they react to pain. That's also something I want to bring up for context, but I'm curious to know what does that look like when you get hit by rubber pellets and rubber bullets?
Yeah, so depending on how far you are from someone and what kind of projectile it is. So they're often referred to, and I hate this term, they're often referred to as less lethals,
Mm,
which I think is kind of a judgment that like can't be made. Like you don't know actually based on anybody's body if something is going to be less lethal or not. But I will generally think of them as like rubber projectiles or rubber bullets because that's what they are. Like calling them less lethals does not mean that they are not still bullets that come
hmm
from a gun. And I think that that's really important to remember, and to always reiterate, right? Like just because I don't think it serves us to like not call it a bullet. Um, but it does serve the police to like let them not call it a bullet. So, anyways, if you are hit with a rubber bullet or a similar type of projectile, it is going to hurt. It is likely going to hurt a lot. And so, I think being able to assess whether it hit a, it hit muscle or it hit bone is really important. Um, like if you are somebody who has experienced fractures in the past easily, you want to make sure that it's like not broken a bone. If it's below the waist, you want to see like where it hit. So obviously like there are parts of the bodies that can take impact in different ways than others. So like if you're hit in a spot that is really sensitive for kidneys, that's obviously going to be really different than like if you are hit in the middle of your thigh. Not to say that it's going to hurt any less, but like there's different risk for like the types of internal injuries
Mhm.
you might experience, as well as like if you take it to the middle of the chest,
Mhm.
because that's where like heart and lungs are. Depending on like where it hits you in the chest, could potentially like, even if it's just a small fracture, could like hurt, could like get one of your ribs.
Mhm.
So those are always things that like I am thinking about, in terms of the like the place that somebody is getting hit by a rubber bullet or other type of projectile. And then if it's above the neck, then um, you're gonna want to make sure that someone doesn't have a concussion. And so
Mhm.
these are types of situations where if there is a street medic on site, you're going to want to connect with that street medic. They're going to probably do a couple, like quick neurological things to see like if you can move your eyes, like if you can like hear things on both sides of your head, if you can feel things on both sides of your face. And they're also probably gonna like go through and test for concussion,
Mhm.
or like some sort of traumatic brain injury.
Mhm.
But it's also going to be important, like in those types of situations, that you're then going to like go off site to some sort of urgent care, or if you need it, to an emergency room.
Mhm.
Um, it's more likely that you would like have to go to urgent care, hopefully, rather than emergency room.
Mhm.
But those are situations where also like you're going to want to like get those sorts of things documented as quickly as possible as well. Like that will be useful in terms of any sort of like legal case or like journalistic case, or just like other NGO documentation. Like I know groups like Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International will frequently like document patterns of injuries,
Mhm.
to like document like kind of community-wide abuse,
Mhm.
and community-wide violence. And so like getting pictures, clear pictures with like enough good light of your injuries as soon as possible, as well as like getting any x-rays you might need, getting concussion protocol, and then getting understanding like a clear treatment plan for what you might need. So whether that is to like immediately get some ice packs like on your bruises, whether it is um, to like not have a ton of light, or like cell phone use or computer use for a little bit, whether it's to rest, whether it's to hydrate, like those
Mhm.
things are going to be really important, both for a chemical weapon like pepper spray or tear gas, but also for these, yes, also for something like a rubber bullet or
Mhm.
a similar type of projectile.
And for those who can't join the resistance against the ICE and federal rogue interventions, what can people do to support this movement and to support the safety of protesters and civilians alike?
Yeah, so there's a few things that are kind of like related to how we care for each other. And then there's a couple of things that are related to like culturally, how we talk to each other and like think about these things in particular context, right? So the first ones that I wanted to mention are like the ways that we help and care for each other, like um, the ways that we can like be doing action even if we can't be on the streets. So this could include like joining a rapid response ice watch network in your neighborhood, or in your particular community. So here in Chicago, there's a lot of rapid response networks, on the northwest sides and the southwest sides of the cities, and there's a ton of neighborhood based ones as well. Um, Especially they are present in neighborhoods with a large Latino, Latina population. But we also, because of the raid that happened at the the housing the housing facility in South Shore see that we just like we need these rapid response networks everywhere, right? And these types of networks, they track the presence of ICE and the Customs and Border Patrol police. And they put out calls for people to show up and either like act as a deterrent or act as a documenter. I know that some of these rapid response networks have also um, been um, been having people like go stand outside schools or will go be like at a community event to just like watch and be able to be a deterrent or be able to make sure that like ICE is not entering a school or a building or to make sure that like people's kids get home okay. Because that's something that a lot of parents have experienced is like fear of sending their kids to school or going to pick up their kids from school because ICE have been like picking up parents and like a school pickup line, which is like so terrible and so violent. Um, Another way that people can get involved is to join like community or mutual aid efforts to support families who are directly impacted by um, by either having someone from their family like incarcerated or at risk for deportation, or those who are at fear. So whether it is like going to the store to get groceries or cleaning supplies or mutual care items for people who are afraid to leave their house, or like providing circles of financial support for people who like have stopped working or are not able to work right now. I've already shared a ton about showing up at places like the Broadview ICE facility, so I won't go into all of that. But the other thing I wanted to mention, the other thing I wanted to mention is like direct resistance is to support campaigns that are reducing local police department funding. So in Chicago, there's an ongoing campaign called the Public Health and Safety Campaign, which I've included a link to in the episode notes, that is looking to like reroute money that has been given to the police department and put it into things that will support communities. Um, and so it is because we know that like the money that is given to police and just the systems of policing in general make our communities less safe, and especially in Chicago, even though it is not a place, even though it is on paper legislatively labeled as a quote unquote sanctuary city, we have still seen that the police are either not intervening to interrupt ICE activity in support of like residents of Chicago and the people that live here, or are like actively supporting the operations of ICE, even if they are not like sharing information through their like their infrastructure, right? And so any money, any campaign that is to reduce local police funding ultimately gets at the policing that is going to reduce things like ICE and Customs and Border Patrol as well. So those are really important things that people can get involved in. And then the other two things I wanted to mention are more related to information and culture. So one thing that um, I am really I am really careful about and have been as somebody that has followed right wing movements for a long time and like right wing opposition to social justice movements is to make sure that I'm getting my news from trusted outlets. So I make sure to get my news from places that aren't just going to reprint a police statement or a police press release. That's what a lot of like mainstream news sources do. A lot of legacy media will do that. They'll say, well, according to statement by police, XYZ happened, which number one, like perpetuates what's called propaganda, perpetuates the idea that like the police are frequently right and that like the police have the most up-to-date information, which like both of those things are not necessarily true, and also can spread misinformation, right? So misinformation is when information is shared and it's wrong, but it's not necessarily shared on purpose. Whereas disinformation is information that is wrong and it's shared on purpose, like it's shared with like intentionally knowing that it's wrong. Um, so, you know, locally, the outlets that I trust for a lot of my news in general are places like Unraveled Press, the Tribe, which that's an outlet TRIIBE, and Borderless magazine. Those three have been particularly good in documenting like immigration justice issues. But they also like do a lot of work around police and policing in their journalistic work.
Mm.
Um, and then the last thing I wanted to mention related to culture and what people can do, even if they're not on the streets, has to do in like the ways that we talk about what's happening in the US right now, which I think could be, I don't know, this may resonate with your particular audience because of who we are. Like we're diasporic Asian people. But one thing I've seen on on a lot of social media, places like Facebook or Instagram or Blue Sky. I'm not on X, but I also know it's there because it's been reposted from there. Is just this constant need to compare the rising authoritarianism that's happening in the US to like places in parts of Asia, right? So it's like, this isn't supposed to happen here. What are we, North Korea? Um, and I don't think that it serves us to like constantly be defining what's happening in this country as like a devolution into Asianness, right? It's like we are like falling off the pedestal of
Mhm.
Western exceptionalism into being Asian or into
Mm.
like reflecting Asianness. Like I don't think that's helpful, even if it's like liberals or leftists who are saying it. Um, right? Like it normalizes authoritarianism as something that is like uniquely
Associated.
Asian,
Mhm.
right? It's
Mhm.
associated with Asia and therefore it's foreign. That like it would never be like authoritarianism would never be Western, right? Like it's Asian, and so when we do it, we are being like places in Asia, like China or North Korea or
Mhm.
Russia.
Mhm.
Um, and also like ignores the fact that like
Or South
actually like
America. Yeah,
yeah,
forget
or
about that
South
one. Mhm.
America, yeah. But it also ignores the fact that like actually throughout history, like most of the colonialism and like white supremacy has like come from Europe and like from as an extension like from
Cheers.
the US, right? So
Raise the
like
glass to that. Mm.
so I think it's really important for us to like even if it means being like the wet blanket in a conversation to like push back against that that actually like it what we're seeing is like it is so rooted in the history of like the United States and the US colonial project in the way that like
Mhm.
there have been so many thefts of land and labor and like a foreign policy that's like completely rooted in occupation and imperialism, like the expansion of the military industrial complex, that like we don't need to compare it to a place like Russia or China or North Korea as like the worst thing we could become. Like maybe
Mhm.
we already are the worst thing we could become simply
Mhm.
by being the US.
Hmm. Thank you so much for really spending so much of your time, talking to me or talking to my listeners, and also like really giving us like a lot of the heavy nuances. I also want to say to the audience, I do hope after listening to this, I hope that you're being very gentle to yourselves. Take a deep breath, hydrate, because it is a lot to take in. I mean, it's also jarring to hear how much really needs to happen. This is where we're at. And I think that to get past the shock, we also have to be grounded in ourselves and to the people that we care about. And I really appreciate you really also reminding us of how we care for our communities, our loved ones, and protecting ourselves as a reminder that, this is a long game. This is not just a one-time transaction. This is very much like, how do we become more knowledgeable? How do we become more self-aware? How do we deepen our ways of compassion and what we provide to our communities, to help our communities thriving, to survive first, but hopefully to thrive. And I also hope that you get to read the episode notes for any resources, the links that are going to be there. And I hope that with all of this said, I hope that this will give you a starting point and that it'll spark your curiosity and help you engage in more conversations about this. I think there's a lot of wonderful grassroots groups, collective groups that are doing a lot of work that we're not really always seeing. So I think it's very important to name that. Um, and know that there are people putting their bodies, their minds, their resources on the line. And I think there's so many different ways to contribute that does not have to involve putting your bodies. Like there's other methods. So I hope that this is an opportunity for listeners to, take a moment to reflect. And I also want to say, thank you, Jung. I wonder if you have any lasting remarks to.
Yeah, thank you, Randy, for having me on again. I hope that one day I can come back and we could just talk about books or like the NBA
Yes.
season.
And possibly the fact that
um,
NSYNC might do a reunion tour and I don't see Justin Timberlake's name on it. And I'm like, interesting.
Well, I know you will have many thoughts about that, and hopefully, like at some point, this like U.S. authoritarianism will end, and we can just talk about our hobbies and like the
Yeah.
things in pop culture that we love.
Hmm.
Um, but the last thing I wanted to say is that I am I'm really grateful to all of your listeners for if you got to to this part in the episode. I'm so grateful to you for um, listening to this information, hopefully sharing some of this information, sharing the links, sharing like the resources that I shared. Um, and I said this at the beginning, but I'll share it again that um, with more information, we can have a better understanding of what's happening. We can be more prepared, and when we are prepared together, we are powerful, and that is what it takes to be brave
Hmm.
together. Not necessarily to move without fear, but to move with purpose and to move with clarity and to move with knowledge. Um, and to do it anyways, even
Hmm.
if we are afraid. So I hope that whatever you are doing in opposition to ICE, in opposition to anything that is happening, um, as we are experiencing rising authoritarianism and like an ascent towards fascism in the US, that you remember that like you can be brave, you are brave, you are powerful, and we will
Hmm.
be brave and powerful together.
Hmm. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much for your kind words. And also for, again, the level of wisdom, experience, and labor that you've put into this conversation. And I hope that this will spark something greater for all of our listeners and what action they decide to take and how they remain informed. So thank you so much, Jung.
Yeah, thanks, Randy.